We're going to get going in about 1 minute. Hi, Laura. Nice to see everyone here today. All right. So we are now at the hour mark. So we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So greetings, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining in for the first of our three-part educator webinar series with the United Nations Visitors Center. So we're so excited for our topic today. So our series is called Teach the UN. And today is going to be our first, which we'll start with Meet the UN. And we have a wonderful panel of speakers and a team that has been working hard over the past about 6 to 8 weeks to prepare for these sessions. So we will have 2 more webinars every 2 weeks. So we have one coming up in 2 weeks and then a month from now. So we invite you to join for those as well. And we're going to be sharing some information on those at the end of today's session. Before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on our goals for this webinar series. So probably many of you have joined for our Take Action Global webinars in the past, which have been designed for both teachers and students. Today's webinar is specifically designed for educators. And so we're hoping that we are able to give you a lot of information that you can use as you're getting ready to kick off your school year with students of any age. So just to briefly read our objective, this webinar series aims to connect classrooms to the work of the United Nations, the SDGs, and human rights. Through the webinar series, which covers all aspects of the United Nations with 3 main themes: the UN Visitor Service section, which is referred to as VSS, you may hear that today, in cooperation with UNDGC colleagues, aims to provide a knowledge basis and pedagogical material to be used by the Teach SDGs and Take Action Global educators in their lessons. So I'm excited to introduce our 2 guests that will be sharing with us today. And so first off, we have Hadass Fisher, and Hadass will join in a moment to give you a little bit of background on where she's joining from. So Hadass is a UN tour guide specializing in students' tours. Originally from Israel, she holds an MA in modern history from Tel Aviv University. At the UN headquarters in New York, she conducts tours in English and Hebrew to various groups of visitors, from kindergartners to senior citizens and everyone in between. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she has been working on developing new online experiences and educational materials to help teachers and students stay connected to the UN and its mission. Hadass is passionate about history, public education, and engaging the next generation of global citizens. We're also honored to have Elizabeth Victor. Elizabeth heads the United Nations Visitor Service in New York City. The section provides information about the work of the United Nations to the general public, as well as specialized audience such as schools, universities, civil society, and the media. A UN staff member since 2005, Elizabeth has worked in public information roles in Nairobi, Vienna, and New York, serving as media officer for the United Nations Environmental Program and head of public information for the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. Previously, Elizabeth worked for the European Commission in Brussels and in Ukraine, and she holds a bachelor's degree in Russian studies from the University of London and a master's degree in communications from Leicester University in the UK. In addition to her native German and English, she is fluent in Russian and conversant in French and Ukrainian. Originally from Germany, Elizabeth is the mother of 2 boys, aged 16 and 20. So with that, I welcome our wonderful panel of today's guests, and I'm excited to turn it over to you, Elizabeth, to introduce your organization and Hadass.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for the great introduction. And I'm so excited to see so many people from all over the world. Really very, very impressive turnout. Thank you very much to Jennifer and to Teach SDGs and Take Action Global Educators. I also want to acknowledge the fact that I have a number of colleagues joining us on this call, and thanks to my great team without whom this would not have worked. And thanks to everybody for being here today. And hopefully you'll join us for the other two webinars as well. Just to put what we're doing in context. So as Jennifer mentioned, our role as a visitor services section is to inform the general public. We're part of the United Nations Department of Global Communications. That means we inform about the work of the UN. We also address misinformation. We motivate people to care, and we hopefully inspire them to take action. So it's not just about knowing, it's about doing something. And in a way, we have a very similar outlook on life as you all do as teachers and educators. We're hoping to raise the next generation of global citizens and change the world for the better, one student at a time. You may have seen in the news, our Secretary General yesterday introduced a policy brief of the impact of the current pandemic on education, and the timing is quite fortuitous for us. And he actually called it the largest disruption of education ever. The pandemic has meant that or left over 1 billion children out of school in over 160 countries around the world. 40 million children are missing out on their very first year of school. Very difficult to kind of catch up with that. And that's in addition to the fact that we were already quite behind in meeting Sustainable Development Goal number 4 on education. So this is probably going to set us back even further on that. The pandemic has put an enormous amount, I don't have to tell you this, an enormous amount of burden on teachers, on parents, especially on mothers. And so the policy brief makes a number of recommendations for governments and policymakers. We're actually going to be sharing a link to the full document. You can familiarize yourself with that. But I wanted to point out the fact that this exists and that the UN is very, very much focused on education and on supporting teachers and working with governments to find ways to overcome the current challenges. The focus going forward should be on financing, on funding. Any recovery packages should absolutely include and prioritize funding for education. We also need to make sure that those who are already left behind through the digital divide, through disabilities, through being displaced and marginalized are not forgotten amidst the pandemic. And we have to build back better and use this as an opportunity to also improve the way that we teach and we educate the next generation. Just to quote the Secretary General again, he said, as the world faces unsustainable levels of equality, we need education, the great equalizer, more than ever. So perfect timing to be talking to you today. I'm hoping that we'll see you again in 2 weeks' time. And enjoy today, enjoy this journey, and we're looking forward to working with you on this series of webinars and hopefully for the future. So thank you again very much, Jennifer. And with that, I'll hand it over to Hadass. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you very much, Jennifer and Elizabeth. So as Jennifer said, my name is Hadass. Usually in non-pandemic times, you can find me at the headquarters, this iconic building. I saw that one of you has written that, it's very much true. Where I conduct tours, I welcome visitors from all around the world, and I conduct tours in English and Hebrew. And it's really a privilege to be here today, to see such a diverse group of educators from all around the world. We very much miss the building, miss our work at the building, but We try, 2020 has been different than any of us had thought, and we all try to make the best of it. So we hope this opportunity to kind of bring you behind the scenes of the UN in a virtual way would be beneficial for you and would help us to strengthen our connection with educators around the world. So let me tell you a little bit what we prepared for you today. So today's topic is Meet the UN. So I'm going to provide kind of an overview, context, to put the history of the UN in context, the big issues, the mission of the UN, where it all started, where it came from, and going all the way to the present, how the UN is addressing its current challenges, current global challenges, including the current COVID-19 pandemic. So we prepared a presentation here for you. I'm going to walk you through it. We're going to cover the major organs of the UN, the way the UN works, and so forth. And then we're also prepared for you an educational pack. So a series of lesson plans. For this webinar, they focus on the birth of the UN and also the work of peacekeepers. So after I give you this brief presentation about the UN in general, we're going to go into the resources that prepared for you, lesson plans, primary resources that you can use in the classroom, and I'm just going to walk you through and show you what we prepared for you. So during my presentation, please feel free to write any questions that you have in the chat. I know I have a very big group, which is great. I'm very thrilled about that. So the chat might get busy, which is great. And we also have Elizabeth, who could help me kind of follow the question. So I'm going to I'm going to pause at certain points in the presentation to collect some questions and answer them. I hope I can answer as many as you have. So please feel free to write your questions as you go along. And if I miss some, I don't have time to answer some, I'm going to hopefully answer at the end. Okay, also in case I have some technical difficulties, I just want to mention that I have my colleague Jonathan as a backup. So don't worry, you're in good hands. Even if I disappear for a moment, you're not going to lose on the experience. Also, I just have to say, I have this orange shape here. I'm not really sure how it happened, how to get rid of it, but I hope it goes off as we move along. I think it might be from the people trying to come in, Jennifer. Okay. Elizabeth, I also see that there's a hand raised. So maybe we should just go and see. Okay. So Elizabeth, I'm going to leave to you the managing of the chat. And if I need to know anything, just let me know, okay? Okay. Okay, so let's start with this iconic building, the United Nations headquarters, and which is the opening sentiment at the United Nations, it's your world. So the United Nations, the headquarters usually would see a lot of diplomats coming, meetings from different officials, but ultimately the United Nations is for everyone. It's for every global citizens, doesn't matter where you come from, what age you are, and it's your world. So let's dive right in and take a look back at the beginning of the UN. So we're just now this year celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, and it looks very different than the way any of us envisioned the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. But actually, in a way, the pandemic is showcasing why the UN is so much needed. It's showcasing the need for global organization that can coordinate facing how the world faces challenges in this scale. So June 1945, at the end of the Second World War, was the moment when the United Nations came to be. And the scene that you see here is the signing of the Charter of the United Nations, the Constitution, like the Constitution of the UN, as we like to say. the basic documents that define the way the UN works and operates until today. So this was a moment of kind of a window, an opening. That's the way I usually present it to the students who come to visit the headquarters. A moment in time where the world could really look at the destruction of the Second World War and the era also of the First World War, after 2 world wars, where the world was left, and diplomats leaders came to see the need for a new beginning on a global scale and the need for a new international organization. So this was the moment where the UN came from. So this conference that you see the photo from, the conference where the charter was signed was held in San Francisco. Sorry. So I see someone is not muted. Okay. So the conference was held in San Francisco, and according to the charter, so the charter defines the basic organs of the UN. There are 6 organs of the UN. I'm just going to recap very briefly. We're not going to talk about all of them today, a few major ones. So we're going to talk about the work of the Security Council in charge of international peace and security, the work of the General Assembly, which is the place that brings all the member states of the UN together. We're also going to talk about the work of the Economic and Social Council, which deals with development, and here's also where the SDGs come into play. There's also the Secretariat. So the Secretariat is the administrative arm of the UN. So Elizabeth mentioned, we are from the Department of Global Communications, which is part of the UN Secretariat. So the job of the Secretariat is to support the parts that are the Security Council, the General Assembly, support the member states in their decisions and make sure that the UN is up and running. There's also the International Court of Justice, deals with disputes between countries, member states. We're not really going to talk about it today. And also there's the Trusteeship Council, which had a great historical role in helping to end colonialism and bring more countries, more member states to the fold within the UN. But also, since it's more of a historical role, we're not really going to discuss it today. So let me move to, sorry, I'm trying to get rid of the orange. Okay, so the gentleman that you can see here is Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN. He's been in office since 2017. So the Secretary General of the UN, Elizabeth just mentioned his policy brief. He has 2 main roles. So one is the head administrator of the UN, is the head of the Secretariat. So he's in charge of the Secretariat, but the other role is a diplomatic role. So he's considered one of the world's top diplomats, and he works a lot in bringing member states together. I can also mention that during COVID-19 pandemic, he also called for a global ceasefire between member states and was pushing it through the UN system. The Security Council has also discussed that, and after some deliberation was able to agree and call for a global ceasefire in time of the global pandemic. So this is the Secretary General. I also wanted to kind of show you the headquarters itself, and I hope that some of you had the chance to visit it in person, and I really hope that if you hadn't had a chance yet, you're going to have the chance to visit it in person in the future. We miss this iconic building very much and hope to get back really soon. So first of all, you can see here the flags of all the member states, one of the iconic images of the UN headquarters. So when the UN started with the signing of the charter in 45, the UN had 51 member states. Now, since then, the membership of the UN grew quite a lot with various developments. The Axis powers have joined gradually. Decolonization has added a lot of new members from Africa and Asia to the folds of the UN. So today there are 193 member states of the UN. The last one to join was South Sudan. And so the headquarters itself, the complex, well, one question was, where should it be? So as I mentioned, the conference was in San Francisco, and there are many ideas. It's actually one of those fascinating anecdotes and chapters in the history of the UN. Where should this global international organization should be headquartered? So there are a few ideas that were raised. It was pretty much agreed upon it would be in the United States. The US was really pushing the United States forward, and the Department of State of the United States was actually the one organizing the conference in San Francisco. So it was pretty much agreed upon it would be in the US, but where in the US, there are all kinds of ideas. San Francisco was one, Philadelphia was one. There was even an idea to maybe place it in the suburb, maybe in a, kind of like a sprawling campus. But in the end, the headquarters came to New York City. New York City first is a cosmopolitan city that can house and be a home to many people from all around the world to live, to work in. And there was also a donation from the Rockefeller family, you might know from the Rockefeller Center. So the Rockefeller family, one of the members of the family, John D. Rockefeller Jr., was very much involved in international affairs, and he came up with the idea of purchasing this plot of land. It's on the bank of the East River, New York City, and the plot of land was donated to New York City, to the UN. So then a team of 11 architects from around the world, so it was international kind of experiment in international cooperation in and of itself. This team came together to design the complex. Now, these were really the top architects of the time, including names like Le Corbusier from France, Oscar Niemeyer from Brazil, and very famous and notable modernist architecture. So the idea was to really build a complex that would embody, that would convey the new ideals of the UN, international organization. So modernist style, and also some values were embedded within the way the complex was designed. So I'll give you just one example that you can see from here, the use of a lot of glass and metal. So I know nowadays using glass to build skyscrapers, it's very common. If you look at, for example, Midtown Manhattan, pretty much every office building looks like that. By the time, it was very innovative. And glass conveys openness and transparency. So again, the idea was not to build a place where politicians, diplomats can huddle, make secret plans, secret shake hands. No, the idea was to build a place that would be open for everyone. So the use of glass meant to symbolize that. There's also all kinds of ways in which the design conveys these new ideas of openness and transparent diplomacy. And again, I really hope you get a chance to visit the headquarters and see it for yourself. So the headquarters has this special status. So it's not really international territory, as we often get asked. But so, for example, you're still under jurisdiction, generally in New York City, New York State, but the headquarters have their special status. So the headquarters have their own security officers, there's their own postal service, and all kinds of special provisions for the headquarters. So if you move ahead, the UN was built on 3 pillars. So we're going to see how the 3 of them kind of feature in the work of the UN. And these are peace and security, development, and human rights. So we're going to see them throughout this experience. Now, the headquarters is also a kind of a small art gallery with many different works of art from throughout the world that again meant to convey and emphasize the vision and the ideals that are behind the work of the UN. So I also wanted to share with you this mural that is, you will be able to see if you visit the UN headquarters, you can see it as part of the main floor where the main council are located. So this mural was made by a Spanish artist, Jose Perez Zanetti, and I would like to just focus on a few parts of it because it really kind of helps to convey the ideas behind establishing the UN. So this part is the beginning. If you come from the entrance and you move through and look at the mural, this is what you would see first. So this part represents World War II. So we see scenes of destruction, of suffering, of death. Then this part in the middle is the building of the United Nations itself. So it shows people coming together from all corners of the world to join in building a new world and building this new organization. And then the end again is reconstructing the world. Now at the end here, so this will be the end of the mural, you see a woman holding a baby and a man holding seeds. And these are two symbols of new life, new beginning after the destruction of war. So very tangible symbols to the new beginnings that was envisioned in the establishment of the United Nations. So how is it to be, how would the UN would ensure this new beginning and a new kind of world? So we now arrive at kind of our next stop, which is the Security Council, in charge of international peace and security. Now here I usually say to my visitors, the students who come, that in terms of diplomacy of international affairs, this is probably one of the most important rooms in the world. And it's really iconic. We can all recall events that we saw happening there in the news. And the Security Council discusses mostly its responsibility to discuss wars, conflicts, emergencies, security emergencies around the world. Now, in recent decades, the Security Council has also been thinking about its role more broadly. So even issues that we might not have been considered security issues in the strictest sense in the beginning are now more and more thought of, conceived of as part of work on peace and security. And these are issues like, for example, sexual violence in wars, issues like climate change, issues like the pandemic. So we see that the Security Council has been broadening the way it thinks about the issue of maintaining peace and security, which is its major responsibility within the work of the UN. So let's kind of dive in and just see how the Security Council functions and works. And I'm also going to share with you a few anecdotes and details about how the Security Council works in this time, in COVID-19 times. Because even though the headquarters is mostly closed, the UN is very much up and running. And in fact, is even more needed than ever to face this global crisis. And so we see that parts of the UN, Security Council included, are very much active, and I'm going to share how it's all managed in the days of conditions of COVID-19. So the Security Council, first, just kind of like very basic functionality and structure, is made of 15 member states. And again, it's all part of the charter. So it is the way the bodies of the UN, the councils work, is all part of the basic agreement between member states. So the Security Council is made of 15 member states, and they're divided into two groups. The first group I'm going to just talk briefly of is the 5 permanent members, or the P5, as they are often called. And these are the main allies in the Second World War. So China, France, US, UK, and Russia, right? So some of them might have changed their names, not the Soviet Union, Russian Federation. In the China representation, there have been some changes, but these are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. So the P5, first of all, they're permanent. So they always have a seat at the council. And they also have what's called the veto power. So famous veto power means that if one of them votes no on a decision, it cannot pass. It's off the table. And what I often emphasize to students, to my visitors, is that the decisions of the Security Council are legally binding. So all member states have to follow them. And that makes the Security Council so important, so influential. So besides these 5 permanent members, there are also the 10 non-permanent members. And these are member states who come to the Security Council for 2 years each. They are elected by the General Assembly. So Security Council and General Assembly work closely together on many issues. And so they're elected for 2 years. They're elected according to geographical representation. So there are 10 non-permanent members, right? So 5 from Africa and Asia. It's 2 and 3, depending on the year. 2 from Western Europe and others. 2 from Latin America and the Caribbean, and 1 from Eastern Europe. So this is kind of the makeup of the council. So every year, 5 come in and 5 go out. So every year there's elections, and actually just recently in June, the elections for the 2021-2022 seat in the Security Council were held, and they were very different than usually. So these elections are held in person, and they are secret elections. So it's all very kind of old school. There's this box which is placed in the General Assembly. Each delegation, so each member state has a delegation to the United Nations. So each delegation gets a ballot, a paper ballot, and someone comes to put the ballot inside the box. So this also happened this year, but quite a little bit differently, because usually it's maybe the busiest day for the General Assembly. We see almost all member states coming to cast their votes. It's the most important kind of elections in the General Assembly. And this year they also came, but under very strict physical distancing guidelines. So 1 person from each delegation came and put in their ballot. And so it was very different, but it still happened. And the elections were held, and there are going to be some new members in Security Council for 2021. So for example, Ireland and Norway were elected among the Western Europe and others. So the 10 non-permanent members don't have a veto power, but they're essential to the work of the council. So for a decision to pass, 9 countries need to vote yes. Right, you see here voting. Again, it's done in very kind of old school way with diplomats raising their hands. So the 5, which means that the 5 permanent members, they can block decisions, but they cannot make them happen just by themselves. And this kind of the balance in how the Security Council works. So I can also share with you that the issue of the vetoes and some tensions regarding that, some tensions regarding key issues, conflicts around the world are always bubbling in the Security Council. There are some issues like, for example, conflict in Syria, where we know that permanent members have a very different idea on the conflict, right, to put it mildly. So this sometimes causes a lot of discussions, a lot of negotiation is needed before some joint agreed upon resolution can be reached on. So it is part of the nature of the work of the Security Council. Because again, the idea of the UN is to work through negotiation, through interaction and communication. So here we just can see the, sorry, we'll move in a moment. My computer sometimes freezes for a moment. So just a different angle of the Security Council. I can also kind of tell you the major tools. So what can the Security Council do with these conflicts? And the kind of the major tool of the Security Council, the one it uses the most, is what's called peaceful resolution of disputes. So trying to bring countries together to engage in peaceful cooperation to solve their problems. So Security Council often calls for a ceasefire. There are some envoys sent on behalf of the Security Council or behalf of the Secretary General, who works a lot with the Security Council, so are sent to the region to try to help with bringing more understanding to solve issues. And again, it's something I often emphasize to students, because often, when I have school groups, and I ask them, how can the Security Council solve conflicts around the world? Oftentimes kids would tend to say, send some troops, go in, and kind of very punitive measures. And I always try to emphasize that the way Security Council works is mainly through discussions, calling for a ceasefire, peaceful resolutions of disputes. But it's not the only tool at the at the disposal of the Security Council. The Security Council can also impose sanctions. So it could be, say, arms embargo, there's travel ban on individuals, there's asset freeze. So this is also something as a sanctions regime. It's also a tool Security Council has been using. And the point of sanctions is never to hurt people, to make them suffer. The idea is to bring a government, the decision maker, bring them back to the negotiation table. And there's also, if there's no other choice, if there's no, as a last resort, there's the option of military intervention. So the Security Council can authorize military intervention. Now, it's not going to be done by, there's no UN standing army. It's not going to be done by the UN itself. If there's need for a military intervention, it's going to be done by one of the member states. We're going to talk briefly in a few minutes about peacekeepers who have a different work within the framework of the UN. So they don't do military intervention. Their work is quite different. I'm going to elaborate on that. But just to make it clear, I'm going to give you an example in a moment of a specific conflict and how the Security Council has been intervening and engaging with this conflict. Just before that, just one of the most kind of this is something that visitors always find fascinating is the multilingual aspect of the UN in general and the Security Council in particular. So the UN brings together people from all around the world who speak different languages. And one of the key ideals of the UN is multilingualism and multiculturalism. So the Security Council of the UN actually has 6 official languages. So these are Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Spanish, and Russian, right? So I'm just gonna repeat that quickly. Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Spanish, and Russian. So these are the 6, and here you can see, for example, these are the Arabic interpreters. So the interpreters sit at these booths in the councils, in the rooms themselves, and they provide simultaneous interpretation. So they hear what's being said and immediately repeat it in a different language. And if you ever engage in interpretation, you would know it's a very, very difficult job. They need to take multiple breaks, and they need to be really the top of the profession. And this is also something that had to go undergo changes with COVID-19, because Security Council has been meeting throughout the pandemic. So like all of us, it has been meeting in a virtual setting. They have not been using Zoom, which is a kind of open platform. They have the conferencing, the video conferencing tool that Security Council has been using. But this tool does not really allow for interpretation, because when interpreters sit in the room, it's wired. Everyone has this kind of earphone that they can hear the interpretation through. So there was no interpretation during the virtual meeting time for the Security Council. Usually when there's no interpretation, the diplomats would use English just to make it convenient for everyone. But I can share with you that France, so every month, one of the members of the Security Council is the president. It's according to alphabetical order, one of the 15. It's not only the permanent members. So when France, which just recently was the president of the Security Council, it insisted that the meetings will be held, or would be, at least they would open the meetings in French, since French is one of the official languages. They're allowed to do that. And I guess some other delegates other missions from different countries had to find some French interpreters if they didn't have someone who spoke French on their team. It was quite challenging for some, but recently these issues have been resolved because the Security Council is actually back in the headquarters. So not back to the Security Council chamber itself, because if I go back, you can see here that this iconic table was not built for physical distancing and does not really allow that. So Security Council actually been meeting in a different chamber, which is bigger and allows for physical distancing. But it is back in headquarters. So again, there's all kinds of you know, I'm sure in his historical perspective, people would be looking, right, about how the UN, how the Security Council has faced these unprecedented times. Just before we move on, I also wanted to show you this lovely tapestry. So this is from the covering of the walls in the Security Council. So each chamber in the Security Council was gifted by different member states, and this was gifted, Security Council chamber was gifted by Norway. So again, I really hope you can come and see it. It was renovated a few years ago. It really looks magnificent. I hope you can see it in real life. So let's just look at the way Security Council has been engaging with, working to face a specific conflict. So what you can see here on the map is Central African Republic in Central Africa. And this, in Central African Republic, there has been a civil war conflict, internal conflict that's been happening, was intensified since 2012. Majorly between, there's a lot of armed groups there, but majorly between Muslim groups and Christian groups. And the Security Council actually, it's a good example because it showcased the full range of actions, of tools that the Security Council has at its disposal. So one action that is very much needed is what's called DDR. So disarming, disarming, demobilizing, and reintegration. So with armed groups, one of the key phases, key points of easing the conflict and moving towards peace is removing the weapons, so disarming, disbanding the groups, which oftentimes give people a sense of belonging, so you need to give them something else, you know, alternative kind of basis for belonging, peaceful basis for belonging, and reintegration. So reintegrating these the people within the civil society. So this is one action that the Security Council has been pushing for and working towards. Also in the frame of peaceful resolution of disputes, there's in 2019, following a lengthy process, there's been a peace agreement signed between 14 armed groups in Central African Republic, and you can see here the signing. You can see here from the flag of the UN here. So this is by no means an end of the process. Of course, it just a point. Signing a peace agreement, as we all know, unfortunately doesn't mean that conflict is immediately going to end, and it's just a phase. It's needed to be worked on. So the Security Council has been continuing to work with actors in Central African Republic to make sure that peace is achievable, that there's progress towards peace. And in Central African Republic, there's also been a military intervention led by French forces and African Union forces. So again, kind of showcasing the range of the actions of the Security Council, and this is just one example, and there are many more. Okay, so the next issue just want to mention is peacekeeping. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to speak about it briefly, and then we're going to stop and pause and take some questions. So peacekeeping, it's belongs with the Security Council, which comes under the responsibility of the Security Council. So I mentioned that there's no standing army of the UN, but so peacekeepers work under the UN flag. You can see here the UN symbol, but there are a few key differences between them and military intervention. So first of all, they represent different member states. You can see here, this is a group from a troop from China. You can see here just the edge of the Chinese flag. So peacekeepers come usually as units from member states. And they also, the nature of the work is different than military intervention. They don't come to invade or to attack. They come to keep the peace. So they can only come with consent from the stakeholders in the country. So unlike military intervention, no one asked Saddam Hussein, for example, during Desert Storm, if he would like to be invaded, but with peacekeeping, there's always a need for consent from the stakeholders on the ground. So that's one a difference between peacekeeping and military intervention. And peacekeepers, they are only allowed to use weapons in self-defense or in defense of civilians. Now, let's take a look at where peacekeepers are spread currently around the world. So you can see here the current map, the updated map. There are currently 13 peacekeeping missions around the world. Now, some of them go back to the very early years of the UN. The first one here in the Middle East from 1948, over 70 years ago. And some of them are new ones. And you can see, for example, the Central African Republic peacekeeping mission. So as I mentioned, every peacekeeping mission has to have consent. There has to be a resolution, a decision from the Security Council sending the peacekeeping mission. And every peacekeeping mission is also being reviewed by the Security Council. So it's not just, send and forget about it, but the Security Council keeps close tabs on what's going on with each and every peacekeeping mission around the world. There also need for people to serve as peacekeepers. So as I mentioned, they come from different member states. So currently there are about 80,000 peacekeepers around the world, and they come from more than 120 member states. So member states don't have to send peacekeepers. It's up to them if they're willing to contribute their troops for that. So peacekeepers can be, they're often soldiers, but there also can be police officers and civil society officials. And just to give you a few examples, so you see some of the peacekeeping missions are more robust. These mainly in settings where the context is that of a civil war. Where the setting is that there's a lot of need of protection of civilians. As you can see here, and this is an example from Mali. Sometimes peacekeepers are also there to protect civilians from natural disasters, as you can see here from Haiti. And peacekeepers are also there to help build institutions, civil society institutions, law and order institutions. And this is actually from the Central African Republic, as you can see, to opening a city hall after renovation work done by the peacekeeping operations. And recently, peacekeepers had a crucial job with COVID-19, because many of these places where peacekeepers are around the world, there are places that suffer from multiple crises. And we know that multiple crises can also exacerbate each other. So these are places that might experience already hunger and famine. They might experience the internal strife and civil conflict that was the reason for the peacekeeping mission to be deployed in the first place. And they also might suffer from different pandemics, earlier pandemics like the Ebola, for example. So with all that, plus COVID-19 creates enormous challenges for very, very fragile institutions. So peacekeepers are also there to help support the vulnerable regions in the era of COVID-19. And I'll just give you a few, so you can see this group of peacekeepers made masks and were handing them. Also showing, of course, model and helping to give publicity to good hygiene practices, how to deal with COVID-19. So here you can see some campaigns. And now it's not coincidental that you see a lot of women here. In recent years, there's a very big push to involve more and more women as peacekeepers. And this is because it's not just good practice, to practice gender equality, but also it's been proven again and again that having women as peacekeepers, mostly in roles where they engage with the civil population, is very, very beneficial for the mission. So female peacekeepers put it in a way that said, when a woman is experiencing, in civil society, experiencing, for example, sexual violence or domestic violence, she would much rather come to a sister from another place than to a man. So for oftentimes peacekeepers, female peacekeepers, and women in the local community can form these bonds, these connections that are hugely beneficial for the work of the peacekeeping mission. So one of the kind of major goals of peacekeeping operations within the UN is to eventually arrive at gender parity. It's still far away, but there are more and more female peacekeepers around the world. Okay, so I think this is a good place to have a pause and take some questions if you have. Okay, I see the chat is full. Let me just take a look.
Hadass, just jumping in here. I'm keeping an eye on the chat. There's a lot of, first of all, thank you for all the fantastic feedback. Lots of thumbs up from everybody. And a lot of people are making suggestions on how they can already use this recording in the classroom, and asking about the different things that we offer in terms of virtual visits and materials. So there'll be information on that will circulate after the end of the session. But I don't know, maybe somebody has a question about the substance that you've just been speaking about.
Hadass?
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
First of all, thank you so much, Jen, and for organizing this, Elizabeth, and all the UN officials. This is amazing. I'm a MUN advisor. I train students for MUN. So I've been to the UN headquarters. I've trained with the UN headquarters. I've trained for UN for MUN rules of procedures with Mr. Bill Yotiv. And so UN is one of my favorite places, and I'm having goosebumps right now because I'm like this little girl when I come to the UN. And it's really, and this year I was wondering, like, you know, with the lockdown and everything, and if there'll be an opportunity. But so here it is, and it's a virtual visit this time. So thank you so much for this. And I was just wondering that, because this is knowledge that we want to give back to our students. When I took my students for the UN visit, like you yourself as a UN guide, I mean, how do you apply for this post? What is the requirement, and is there an application? I mean, what is the application process? Because some of the students are interested in, because like, you know, you want to join the UN, so you can't go through, if you cannot become a UN official, then this is one way of being connected to the UN. So we'll just like to know more about that.
Right.
And also the UNV volunteers, the UNV, that application as well.
Yes, great question. Yeah, we get that very, very often when we have groups of students coming, which is great because it means they're excited about the UN. So we have in our, Elizabeth, I'm sure you can also share it in the email that we're going to send after, right? So we have the kind of guide how to approach the kind of UN careers website, how to find more information about careers within the UN. I always say to students who ask me that it's not easy to come work for the UN, but it's very clear and kind of straightforward. So it's not kind of confusing process. It may be difficult to get a position, but the process itself is very clear. You apply for a position. I can share that I just applied for this position. I just saw an ad, the opening, and then I applied. So we can definitely share that as a resource for the students. I also saw in the chat that someone asked that students would probably ask, how can you join as a peacekeeper? Which is, again, it's very much a question that I get often. And the answer is that it's usually through a country. So the mechanism is through a member state. So either from the army, from the police unit, and so on. So it's organized through the member state. Also, I would like to say that if you want to use materials, so also in what we prepared for you, we have educational pack. There's a lot of information about peacekeepers. There's some ideas for engagement for your students, some projects. One, for example, is to have students kind of research, think for themselves and research why our female peacekeepers are so beneficial for missions around the world and how they contribute. So we very much would like to make these resources available for you to use with your students. Okay, let me move on, and we'll also have more stops along the way. So another issue that is very popular with students, the second pillar of the UN, and this is human rights. And this is something that students really feel kind of in their bones because it's so universal. So the human rights, what you can see here is, of course, Eleanor Roosevelt, former First Lady of the US, who's really influential and was kind of the leading figure in the adoption of the Declaration of Human Rights. The document here, it's the Spanish version of it. So the Declaration of Human Rights, again, I like to emphasize with students, is part of this moment in history, this opening of opportunities, opening for understanding that happened after the Second World War, and because of such shockwaves, the destruction that everyone could feel in their bones following the Second World War. So the Declaration of Human Rights was adopted in 1948 in the General Assembly, and it includes 30 articles, so 30 kind of rights that everyone in the world should have. If you're human beings, you're entitled to this right. So it includes things like freedom of speech, so some that we would call political or civil rights, freedom of speech, of movement, the right to have a passport, to have a nationality is one of them. And it also includes what we would call social or economic rights, like rights to a shelter, so to housing, to enough food, to basic standards of living. So here students always ask immediately, so first of all, how come, it's not what's currently happening around the world? We're not there yet, which again, we always need to emphasize it's a process. And they also ask, so how come we don't see kind of the UN doing something about all these atrocities that we know happening around the world? So first of all, it's important to notice that this declaration is a declaration, so it's not legally binding. So it has enormous power, but the power it has is more kind of a moral power, because it's kind of the first time that the world has decided on a global standard for human rights. So a lot of what the UN does, so apart from the Security Council, which has the power to have legally binding decisions, so the other parts, and there's also the SDGs is a great example, are built more of this kind of moral power, the power of putting the world behind something, than on more legally binding power. So the declaration is a work in progress. There's currently, as we say, no country in the world that fulfills this in total, but it's been greatly influencing in many constitutions around the world are based on the declaration, and also led to many conventions and treaties, so international agreements where countries, if they sign and ratify, they are legally binded by these conventions and treaties. So the declaration can lead to legally binding documents. And also I want to highlight the influence of women on the declaration. And again, it kind of highlights how forward-thinking was the UN and how it was, part of it was really, and part of people who worked there are really kind of beyond their times. So the declaration starts with this sentence: all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And this is the premise, the basic idea. So the first draft, the first version said all men are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Now, it wasn't necessarily to exclude women specifically, but it was just the available common language. But there was a delegate, a woman. I would like to show you the photo. So these are a few women who worked together as part of the committee that gave remarks and comments on the first draft of the Declaration of Human Rights. So this woman, Hansa Mehta from India, she was the one who actually said to Eleanor Roosevelt, said, no, Ms. Roosevelt, there has to be global, it has to be universal, it has to be human beings and not men. And it was adopted in the end as all human beings. Now, this change was actually very influential because every constitution, every document that was based on the language in the Declaration was actually universal. So changes in language could be very, very influential. And so this group of remarkable women, this is just one example of the changes in language that they made, but were very important. Also, a delegate from Pakistan was influential in including an article on freedom of marriage. So no one would be forced to marriage without their will. So they really contributed a greatly important aspect to this declaration. We're gonna have a whole webinar on human rights, but I also just wanted to mention a resource that I personally really like. So there is a declaration is considered to be the most translated document in the world, according to the Guinness Book of Records. And you can find it in over 500 different languages, including different sign languages from around the world. So there's also the project of recording parts of the declaration. So different people from around the world sent recording of them reading in their native tongue articles from the declaration, which I think is a great resource. It really kind of brings to life the language of the declaration. Okay, so as I said, we're gonna have a whole webinar on human rights. So we're gonna move forward. I saw there was a hand raised, so please, if someone wants to say something, remark, or have a question. Okay. Okay, so I don't hear anything. So, okay, I'll move on. I'll stop at the end. So the third pillar of the work of the UN is development, right? And I'm sure as you're part of, the Teach SDG initiative, it's probably very close to your heart. And the development aspect, the pillar, is very much connected to the other two. And again, something I always say to students, that the three pillars of the UN, they are kind of put differently just to a conceptual basis to help kind of think of the different areas of work of the UN, but in reality, they're all entangled. Because without development, without clean water, a safe climate, there is no peace and security. We know that it can exacerbate conflicts. And there's also no human rights, because part of the Declaration of Human Rights is access to basic standards of living. So all these issues are very much interconnected. And what you can see here is the Economic and Social Council. It's kind of a more obscure council than the Security Council that we often hear about in the news, but it's very important. It's kind of the umbrella for the work of the UN on development. So this council brings together parts of what we call the UN family. So these could be agencies and programs like UNICEF for children, UNESCO for culture and science and education, World Health Organization, of course, now very much in the news. And it also a place where civil society organizations come. It has an extensive list of civil society organizations, NGOs, that work with the council to provide expertise, to provide knowledge. Also brings of course, member states together. So this is the place to bring all these stakeholders together to discuss development. The room, the chamber itself, is a gift from Sweden, although not from IKEA, but you can see the Scandinavian kind of elements in the design. And for example, these kind of beautiful curtains are meant to showcase dialogue. You see the kind of interjection, the different parts. It also meant to kind of symbolize sound waves. So when people discuss, when people have a dialogue, they talk to each other and find common ways to approach problems and solve them. So another just angle of this magnificent, beautiful chamber. Of course, the SDGs are currently at the forefront of the work for the development in the UN. So, of course, as I'm sure you know, adopted in 2015. And again, what I always highlight to students is that how remarkable it is that there were even, there was the achievement of deciding on the SDGs themselves. Just setting the goals is achievement in of itself. And this is because these were adopted in consensus. So all the member states adopted them, agreed on them, supported them. And we know that it's very hard to get people to agree on pretty much anything, and certainly with different member states who have different political cultures, policy priorities, perspectives. So to bring them together to agree on a set of 17 goals, it's actually an amazing achievement. And we all know that these are very ambitious. We all know there is also currently a huge setback with the COVID-19, the pandemic, which again, just kind of reinforces the need to work on them and really bring them to fulfillment. Now, we're not going to delve into that. Also, we're going to have a whole webinar on the SDGs. So I just wanted to put them into context within the work of the UN, also to share with you just one project that we often share with students and is very kind of like engaging for students. They like it very much. And this is regarding recycling, which is something that many students can really feel because it's something that we can all do in our day-to-day life. So we often talk about how plastic is ubiquitous, it's all around us, how it's very useful, it's very easy to use, but also very harmful, and how scientists estimate that if we don't change course, so by 2050, there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than fish. And for students, this is when they're going to be grown-ups. So it's very much kind of their future that we're talking about. This is very nice. It's from the adoption of the SDGs in 2015. It was very nice kind of screening of the SDGs on top of the UN headquarters. So the project that I want to highlight, we showcase, is from Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire. And this is a project to tackle both the issue of plastic pollution and also the issue of education. So Ivory Coast is faced with the problem of plastic pollution. In the countries where we don't have a lot of good plastic treatment facilities, it's unfortunate that it could happen very quickly. Also, some countries don't have, for example, good drinking water, so they sometimes have to use plastic bottles. So it kind of also exacerbates the problem. So UNICEF in Ivory Coast, together with a Colombian company, so it's international kind of corporation, came up with this idea for plastic recycling. Now, this is because Ivory Coast also faces a great problem of shortages in classrooms. About 1 million kids in the country don't have access to what qualifies as quality education. Some kids can be in a classroom that's maybe up to 100 kids. Some of the structures are not really stable, they're not safe to learn in. And we also all know that, in pandemic times, learning in bad conditions, it's very detrimental to your health. So this recycling project is to recycle plastic waste into plastic bricks. So this school that you see, and this is a school, this structure is all made of recycled plastic. You can see here the bricks. We actually have one in the headquarters. As you can feel and see, it's made from plastic. Now, we know it's very hard to get rid of plastic, so here we can use it to our advantage because these structures are very durable. So they're fireproof, waterproof. They can last for hundreds of years and they can withstand extreme weather. So it creates new structures and new schools where kids can learn safely in. So, even just the quality education is not just a matter of the content, but also a matter of the physical conditions, crucial to providing kids with education. Here, it's a lovely picture. You can see the kids, happy with their new schools. So again, when you think about education, we know that COVID-19 is tremendous challenge to quality education all around the world, and again emphasizes the need to work on that together. So again, this is just kind of a taste of the work on education. Of course, one of many different projects from all around the world. Here, I also wanted to, before we move to General Assembly, I just wanted to share with you this wonderful mural mosaic in the headquarters, and this is from the American artist Norman Rockwell, and it's really wonderful in showcasing the basic ideals of the UN. It's called the Golden Rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Treat others the way you want to be treated. And you can see here people from all around the world coming together for this common purpose of treating each other with dignity, with care. So again, I really hope you get to see it. So the General Assembly is the place that brings everything together. It's the heart of the UN. So this is where all the member states come and join discussions about global issues. And again, I emphasize to students that global problems like poverty, like climate change, like the pandemic, cannot be solved by one country on its own. We're all interconnected. We live in a globalized world, and we have to tackle these global challenges together. And the UN is the place to do that. So in the General Assembly, every country is represented equally, one country, one vote. The resolutions that they make, as I mentioned, they're not legally binding, but they hold enormous moral power. So usually the General Assembly would be getting ready for the biggest event of the year, which is the general debate in September. So every September, every country, every delegates get a chance to give a speech on this famous podium. It's usually an event where you see prime ministers, presidents, kings and queens, so head of states come from all around the world to attend and engage in dialogue. This year it's going to happen, but it's going to look differently, like anything else in 2020, and it's going to be probably mostly with video addresses, but hopefully in 2021 it's going to be back in a physical location. And you see here with many different representatives from all around the world. So oftentimes, usually it would be diplomats, but sometimes it would be all kinds of people would be invited for all kinds of occasions. This one is for Indigenous Populations Day, one of the most colorful, enjoyable days in the UN. Of course, the famous podium was housed celebrities, multiple figures. I can share with you that in last September, Greta Thunberg's speech was the kind of the talk of everyone. Very, very powerful, influential speech there. And one kind of issue that the General Assembly has been tackling is disarmament, how to make sure that countries have less weapons. This is the artwork you can see in the entrance. This is the entrance to our complex. So the very famous nonviolent sculpture. And so there are kind of two kinds of weapons when we talk about control of weapons and limiting of weapons, disarmament. So there are what's called conventional weapons, which I always, again, like to emphasize that this might not seem so dangerous to students, to young people, but they are actually, they're responsible for most of the killing around the world. And they are also very, very hard to control because they're so easy to move across borders and to use. The other aspect, of course, of disarmament is weapons of mass destruction. And here we can mention the work of the General Assembly in this, of course, from Hiroshima, one of the only structures that remains in the city. And so the work of the General Assembly to disarm is mostly to bring member states together for treaties, for these international agreements. For example, the Non-Proliferation Treaty that kind of supervises the holding of nuclear weapons by the Permanent Five members, and countries that join the treaty and ratify it commit to not develop and not use nuclear weapons. And also, I'd like to mention, of course, this is a work in progress, and most of the countries within the UN are part of these treaties, but not all of them. And again, it's all part of the dialogue that the UN is engaged with. So this is the 75th year, and there was a big campaign to kind of get from the kind of opinions and output from people all around the world, the kind of what world do we need, what world do we want, what action do we need to take in the 70th year and forward. And it's something that still very much takes place, thinking together, and the UN is, wants to think with people together how to shape our future. There's also recently, because of COVID-19, I would also like to mention the Verified initiative. So we all know that we live in an era where misinformation is abundant, and especially on social media. And we've seen around the pandemic various instances of misinformation, disinformation being shared widely, either maliciously or just without knowing. So the United Nations, the Department of Global Communication, has come up with this project to verify. So kind of provide reliable information and encourage people to take a moment to think, to fact check, and to think about what information they are sharing. And this is very much important with young people who sometimes tend to be very trusting and might share misinformation. And I also like to end with, what I started, the United Nations is a place for everyone. In the charter, the charter begins with the words, "We the peoples of the United Nations." So it's not the idea was not a place for governments, for diplomats to convene, but a place for the peoples of the United Nations, for all of us. So this is something also I like to kind of finish my presentation to students with, to really encourage them to stay engaged, to think of the UN as part of something that is relevant to them, part of their world, and to stay in touch. So yeah, this is also, we also have this information in our the PowerPoint presentation I'm going to share with you, with all the resources that we have for you. You can, of course, all welcome to follow us in Facebook, in Twitter, visit our website. We currently offer virtual tours, virtual experiences for students from around the world. And again, one of the maybe kind of like upsides of the pandemic is that now we are able to kind of host people from parts that maybe would not be able to come to the headquarters physically, but we can kind of welcome them virtually. So this is something that we offer currently. Okay, so let me stop now. Before I just want to briefly show you the lesson plans that we prepared. So I'm just going to stop, and while I'm just going to share the other resource. Maybe Elizabeth, if you want to take a look at the chat and see what questions.
Yeah, there's nothing specific other than lots of really good feedback on the presentation, and lots of ideas, a lot of people saying how wonderful it will be to make this available to students.
Yes,
and
we're
absolutely here to help you make that happen. So
yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So great. So let me move. You can see that, right? Okay, now it's sharing. It takes a moment for my computer. So yes, we very much wanted you to have some takeaway, something that you can actually use with your students based on what I presented to you. So I also would like to say that it's kind of a new venture for us. We're very excited about it, and we would very much welcome any comments, ideas that you have. We would love to stay in touch with a lot of educators, would love to stay in touch with you, and very much welcome your feedback. So what I'm going to share with you is now what you're also going to get through the email from Jennifer. So a kind of educational resources pack that you'll be able to use. So we're just I'm going to show you what we have for you. So this again, kind of ways to contact us. And just we prepared for you, sorry. Just a moment. Okay, I'm gonna share it again. Trying to go back. Sorry, okay. So everything you would need is in the presentation. You would find kind of the whole package, and you can actually even use, if you would like, you can use this presentation in the classroom. Just, you know, feel free to kind of cut and paste the things that you need and have it shown. And also the lesson plans, all the resources are meant to be used either in person or remotely. So we know that, you know, again, 2020 looks differently, and everyone is preparing for remote learning, or I know that here in New York City, some schools are doing hybrid models, some in person. So all the lesson plans and resources are meant to be applicable to both. So we have 2 units. One is the birth of the UN, so more of a historical look, because first of all, it's the 75th year anniversary of the UN. And we also know that in many countries around the world, the end of the Second World War is a subject that's being taught and is part of the curriculum. So we thought it could fit well. So the birth of the UN could fit well within this kind of arc of the world at the end of the Second World War and the move to the post-war world. So we also prepared for you a lot of primary resources for analysis. And all the lesson plans are, so we have options either for middle school or for high school. So you kind of decide what resource is better to use with your students. So this is the first unit, and the second one is about a focus on peacekeeping and the UN today. And we thought that would be very beneficial because, you know, there are few resources already, great resources, lesson plans about the UN in general. And there's, if you know, the world's largest lesson, which is focusing on SDGs. So there's a lot of content on SDG, and there's less content about the work of the UN to provide peace and security. And we feel it's sometimes more obscure part of the work of the UN, but it's actually a great way to show how the UN is involved around the world, actually working towards peace and security. So we think it could be great to kind of introduce students to that. You know, it's of course can also be combined with work for, you know, SDGs, because of course peacekeepers also work to fulfill the SDGs as part of the UN. So we also included some basic UN explainers, videos, short videos about the UN that you can share with your students as maybe, say, like an introduction to a class. So what is the UN in general, very briefly, and also the UN at 75, and this is an address by the Secretary General, kind of looks back at the charter and kind of takes stock of where the UN in the world is today and what needs to be done. So again, there are many videos about the UN, by the UN around, but we try to kind of curate for you the resources that we thought are best to use in the classroom setting. So for the birth of the UN, we're not going to go too deeply into that. You're going to get all that. I just wanted to kind of introduce to you, kind of show you what we prepared for you. So the birth of the UN is meant to be kind of historical, primary resource-based lesson where students will be engaged with the ideas, the basic vision of the UN and the charter itself. There are also some wonderful audio-visual materials that we made available for you to use. So we included some background information from UN sources that you can also use with your students. I'm just briefly moving along just to show the primary resources. So one of them is the UN emblem and flag. That would be great for younger students, say middle school, even I think with some primary grade school students. I know I use it sometimes with, I do kids tours in the headquarters. We take a look together at the UN flag and emblem and try to think what are the ideas that the emblem tries to convey. So kind of break down the vision of the UN into tangible kind of ideas for kids through this, you know, the ideas of peace in the olive branches, and the idea of encompassing the whole world with this map. So we have some guiding questions for you to use if you wish, and also some creative expression projects. So I think fun one is, say, if you could design your own flag and emblem for the UN, how would they look? How would you do it? What kind of ideas you want to incorporate in that? I sometimes also ask that student just as part of the tour, and I get wonderful creative answers. Another option is to take a look at the charter itself. The preamble is very, very famous. It's the opening. I recounted the opening sentence just a few minutes ago, with the peoples of the United Nations. So this kind of historical moment. There's also a recording of that being read by Sir Laurence Olivier, which is very, very kind of moving and very powerful. So again, you can use that with your students. Also, you can have them, say, write their own preamble with their own vision, or even challenge them to think about the kind of what part of the UN of the charter has been fulfilled, what's still yet to be fulfilled. So we can encourage kind of critical thinking about the role of the UN throughout the history. And there's also the conference, sometimes called a conference itself. There's a few great videos from the event. It's fun for students because you kind of see this kind of 40s styles, look, the way people talk. It's always fun for students to be, to see and to experience. And this is also kind of calling the charter to vote. So the actual historic events, President Harry Truman talking about the need to end wars and to get to peace, which is a great way to emphasize the kind of a need that people felt in their bones to end wars at the time. So again, there's prepared for you a few questions for analysis, and there's another resource. This is a great oral history project. People from the early history of the UN spoke about their experiences. So this is one delegate from the US, and we have these quotes. You can also hear him. The interview was conducted in the 80s. So you hear him actually speaking, giving his impression, his recollections of the conference, which again can bring the historical event to really bring it to life for students. So the second unit is about peacekeeping. Here it's more kind of research project based, which could be done either individually or in small groups. And again, it could be either in a remote session or in person teaching. And both kind of lesson plans that we design can be done either in one class, or you can break it down to two shorter. We have some introductory videos for peacekeeping, some information about peacekeepers, the principles, the history, some information on women in peacekeeping and how you see it's a growing force and work done, and the map of where peacekeepers are located around the world. And so for research project, there are a few options. So this is more, I would say, for a higher level students or their high school students, where they can, for example, choose, or the teacher can choose for them, one of the peacekeeping missions, and they would kind of go deep into the circumstances of the establishment of the mission, what happened in the region. It could also be historical peacekeeping missions. Over the years, there have been more than 70 of them. So, and kind of think what happened there, what are the challenges that peacekeepers had, how they overcame them, tried to overcome them. Another option is to have students research specifically the role of women in peacekeeping, or take a look at some, challenges, maybe kind of try to kind of think of how successful a peacekeeping mission was, what's needed to happen to make it more successful, or have it look at how peacekeepers are tackling COVID-19 pandemic and how to help these populations who are in need around the world. So we're going to send you, Jennifer's going to send you all of this material, this presentation, with all the questions, the resources. I just gave you a very brief kind of overlook. Let's take a look at, I'm just taking a look at the chat.
Yeah, Hadass, there's a lot of people, again, reflecting on how useful some of this material will be. And also a wonderful suggestion here from Peter Jones saying, how do we come up with these materials? And I was just getting ready to respond, but maybe I'll do it in person. We're also learning. So we are very interested to have this be the start of a dialogue that we can also improve the resources that we make available. We don't want to start making something available that's not actually useful for you. So I think this is definitely the start of a longer process, and hopefully we can have some more interactive sessions or focus groups in future that we can be sure to be working on exactly the materials that you guys will find useful for your.
Yes, yeah, so I returned to this slide because please write to us, feel free to contact us. We'll be thrilled to hear from you what you need, and this is a work in progress, and we're looking forward to building more materials that you would find useful in your classrooms.
And we're going to be sharing, I think, a little survey after the webinar, so please send us all your comments and questions there as well, and we promise to try and get back to you. This whole experience has been new for us as well. I mean, we're used to interacting with people in person, so we're learning by doing ourselves. So yeah. Sorry, I don't want to take over from you.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing. So Jennifer, you're going to send everyone the presentation, right? So we're going to send it in PowerPoint form or in PDF form, so you can use it however you see fit, right? So thank you so much, everyone, for participation. It is really a great experience. As Elizabeth said, we decided if visitors cannot come to us, we're going to come to them and provide them with resources. And we really miss our visitors very much, and looking forward to seeing as many of you as we can in person.
Well, thank you so much, Hadass, and to Elizabeth and this extraordinary team for all the work you've done to prepare for today's session. And we're looking forward to the next two webinars we have, which will be coming up on August 19th, where we'll be focusing on the SDGs, which I know close to many of our attendees' hearts today that are joining. And then on September 2nd, where we're going to go deeper into human rights, such an important topic, especially in light of everything that's been happening this year. So a couple other updates. So please watch for the follow-up email that we will be sending that will include both the recording and then all of the resources that have been listed here today. So I know, and Hadass, you'll be able to see in the transcript, so many people excited to get these resources and to be able to kick off their new school year with their students with these. A lot, also, as Elizabeth mentioned, a lot of people indicating they're hopeful to be able to use this recording with their students, or maybe even to have a student-specific one in future months. So excited to have discussions on that. We'll also be sharing more information on our upcoming Take Action Global projects. So we have the Climate Action Project coming up in October, which I know a lot of you are already registered and supporting as facilitators for that. And then we'll have the Goals Project, which will specifically focus on the SDGs, coming up in January. Last, we have our Teach SDGs cohort. So our 5th cohort will be opening up applications here soon. So if any of you are bringing the SDGs to your classrooms and to your countries, we would love to have you apply to be part of our Teach SDGs ambassador group. So you can watch for that as well. So we have a lot of things coming up. Very excited for our next webinar on SDGs, which, as you all know, I love the SDGs, and I'm excited to see how we can continue to bring these to our students this year. So again, thank you, Hadass, and to Elizabeth. You all have been very inspirational for us today, and we so appreciate your time. And to everyone who was joining today, thank you, and hope you all stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you at our next webinar. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe and healthy.